Hello and welcome to American Amnesia. I'm your host, Cliff Garner, and I I've been talking about Antifa. I've taken a little time in between the last one and the one I've done here. I did the two pretty close together, actually consecutive days, but I've been having more trouble being able to sit down and do this next one. I've been busy with work, so that's been good. I like working. I do enjoy getting out and actually doing something. I've been sitting on my butt too long. But at any rate, I'm glad to be back to work. So I am still talking about Antifa or Antifa, however you want to pronounce it. I've heard it pronounced both ways by people here in the States and abroad, and even a couple members that I've met over the years. When I was living in Turkey, I had a roommate who was actually a member of Antifa, and he was part of the British chapter. He was also involved in what was it, the Rock Against Fascism, stuff like that. He was a jerk, very simply. I will call him Jackass, which is close to his name, and really does describe how he sounded when he would speak, and especially laugh. And it does describe his character. I I had made friends with him when I was working at English time in Istanbul. We both worked there together, and he was, he was different. He'd joke around and stuff, and he was an anarchist, and I was at one time too. I have said I've said on the program here. I self-identified as an anarchist more than once in my life, and really it was a bit easier way of explaining my political views than to try to explain libertarianism in Turkey. The ideas there of libertarianism, as we're used to it, at least, are kind of obscure over there. There are some people who know a little bit about the Austrian school, for example, and they generally know what's her name, Atlas Shrugged. I can't think of her name now, but they know about her and a little bit about her theories, but not a whole lot. That's not part of the political dialogue of Turkey. Basically, in Turkey, you have a rather corporate bent of capitalism, not so much a free enterprise as we would think of it over here. Idea of it. Generally speaking, the government facilitates the capitalism of the country, and there is a high degree of actually socialism even with Erdogan. And as I've said, I don't think all socialism is all bad. It's not like that. Some of it's actually pretty good. But when it came to what he did with the health care, Erdogan actually did a very good job of it, and I don't know what you would call it. It was just really an extension of Social Security there. So, um, take it however you want. I found that it was actually quite a good way to do it, and when you paid your taxes, you were in, period. And most people who could afford additional insurance actually got it, and they were able to get whatever policy they wanted. It wasn't like over here where now everything's just falling apart, and all the rates are going up, and they're putting more and more deductibles on, and taking away services and everything else. I mean, over there, they didn't do that. It was, what we're doing over here is just plain stupid. Thanks, Mr. Obama, for your stupidity and selling us out to the big corporations. Thanks, Barry. So, at any rate, but to go back to the issue, Jackass was a friend of mine. I actually got along with him rather well. We'd go sometimes and sit down and have a bite, and he'd have a beer or two. I'd drink some tea or coffee, and we'd shoot the breeze. You know, I thought he was a pretty decent sort, and he had problems with his roommates. And I remember hearing about it, and I kind of felt sympathetic. You know, it sounded like they were picking on him. But yeah, but you know how that goes. I invited him to move in with me back then, and he decided not to, and it was fine. And he had finished his contract, and he moved on. He went to, I think he went to Nepal for a little bit, and he was talking about going to South America, and that didn't work out, and he ended up back in Istanbul, and he asked if that offer still stood, and I said sure. You know, I went over and met him, and brought him over to my place and let him set up, and things went well for, I don't know, maybe a couple weeks. But I think he was jealous of my girlfriend. She was his student as well as mine before we dated, and then and she it was her idea. She was quite a bit younger, and since it was her idea, okay. I thought she was younger than she was. I thought she was a teenager, and she's just small, and she looked very, very, very young. She hadn't aged really, and just cute as could be. And when she expressed her interest in me, I said, "Well, you are aware that I am this age, But she says, "I don't care." So, and we were together for a couple years. It ended up being close to 3, all told. Great girl, but Jackass was jealous, I think, and he was mean to her. And for some reason, within just a couple weeks, he soured towards me, and he became a real jackass. So that's the thing. He was a jackass, and he brayed like one, and he acted like one. One of his favorite things to do was to try to catch people saying something or acting a way that he could just yell "racist." That was his favorite, pretty much his favorite game, and I'm a pretty fair amount of Native American, and I happen to say American Indian, and he said, "Oh, that's the most racist thing you could say." Like, really? You sure you know what you're talking about there, pal? For one thing, I am Native American. And as far as I'm concerned, the most racist thing is the assumption that these many, many peoples with many, many languages and different cultures could all be lumped under one big heading that you white people could just put us all in. That shut him up. And as far as it goes, I consider myself white anyway. The point is that I'm not going to have anybody talk to me that way. Especially about that. Especially about that. He has no right to tell me that. He can shove it. But I noticed that he started telling everybody that his grandfather was not me, but he'd tell other people that his grandfather was Native American, and he came over to England out of exile. Okay, well there are a few I'd heard about that actually were in Turkey among other places, but yeah, I don't doubt England, but I know for a fact that because he never told me the story, I just overheard him say it, that he was using it as a way of getting under other people's skin and giving him a good chance to call them racist and consider himself non-white. So that kind of gives you an idea of the measure of his character, and I have little doubt that he's all that unusual. But there are other things too. I mean, he was not badly disposed towards Soros, especially because he was giving his fellow anarchists and whatever money, and that he agreed with legalizing pot, which I don't have a problem with actually. It isn't really so much the programs as what he's doing. You know, people talk about the Koch brothers or Koch brothers or whatever you want to call them, and I kind of find that their effect on politics rather pernicious. But Soros is even worse. I watched Soros and his actions from a rather close position in Turkey than what he was doing in, particularly in the Ukraine at the time, but also what he was doing in Georgia. I got to see kind of tail end of that, and that kind of melded down with the war between Russia and Georgia. That and I was living there at the time. We heard about the ships, the Turkish Navy scrambling out, and a couple of U.S. battleships scrambling with them into the Black Sea. We heard about that, and couple people I worked with actually saw them from the bridge. So things like that, when they would happen, we'd get pretty quick word about it. That's one of the nice things about living overseas. You know, you learn about things like this. He said that underscore the news, and things with Benghazi did that as well. Which is the reason why I would never vote for Hillary Clinton. What she did in Benghazi. And Mr. Obama too. It was just shameful. It was shameful, and I had a friend that almost got caught up in that. I think I've talked about it before, but I'll talk about it again another time. But the thing that I'm getting to is that you do get a different perspective from being overseas, instead of getting everything force fed to you, spoon fed to you by our controlled press. There had been a blackout in America on foreign news from really starting with the Clinton administration, actually towards the middle of it, and that had not ended until really it still hasn't. I mean, what you get about news from Europe or Africa or Asia is very, very limited, and it was greatly limited starting, I think, about 90. I'm going to say 5, and it was fairly early on in his reign, or whatever you want to call it. So anyway, but Jackass, he was. He was always looking for a leg up, wanted to use the race baiting card to beat somebody on the head with every chance he got. I took it away from him, and I don't think he ever forgave me for that. But I think that my girlfriend had part of it to do with that. He may have been interested in me, not her. She was saying, calling him Ibne, which is a really unkind word in Turkish for homosexual, and I really don't doubt it. I'm going to guess that he'd go with just about anything, and but I wouldn't have said that before. And not only that, it really didn't make that much difference to me. he was a person who was a friend, and then he became one that was not. Um, and he was really mean to my girl. He was just really cold to me. I mean, it was ridiculous. He chased me out of my own kitchen, which is fine. I tended to eat out anyway, and what I kept in the fridge was whatever. But he had a way of nicking my food, even though he flipped out one time when I ate some of his leftovers. He was a good cook. I'll give him credit. So the one thing I nicked on his, he was all over my case, and but he had no compunction on stealing from me. Matter of fact, I think he was looking at me as the landlord because he didn't know how to speak Turkish to the people downstairs who were my landlord. But well, they were actually working for the landlord. They were cousins, I think, of the landlord. The landlord had them just kind of collect the money. They were wonderful people. But he would what he would do is he would take when he owed me the money, right? He would wad it up like it was waste paper and throw it on the table. So it'd be sitting on my table, kitchen table, well, not kitchen, but living room table when I'd wake up, and there it was. He wouldn't hand it to me, he wouldn't give it to me, he wouldn't say, do anything polite. He wouldn't even say anything to me. He just wadded up, thrown it on the table. It was trash. And whenever I'd mention the other bills, the internet, phone, and electric, things like that, he would ignore it. Never did pay it. And I'd tell him he needed to pay it, and he wouldn't pay it. And it's like, okay. And he broke the stove. I had to go out and get a new one. And but I waited until he left. He chased me out of my kitchen. Why am I going to make sure he can cook? I mean, really. Although he did have a hot plate, so he continued to do his thing. But he was a jackass. He really was a jackass. So he broke the stove, and so after I booted him out when I finally could. It was really kind of funny because there was a bird on the patio that my girl, she used to just love the bird. We'd sit out on the patio and the bird would sing, and she'd hold me and say, "Oh, Cleve, listen to the bird." Oh yeah, I want to touch it. She would try, but the bird would always fly off. But the day that he left was really remarkable. I watched him go all the way down the street, turned a corner, he disappeared behind the building. No kidding. The bird began to sing. So did my heart. He was a real wet blanket, and a very unpleasant person. And he talked about some of the things that they would do as Antifa. I guess there was an issue in London about squatters. I suppose they were tinkers, which they claim to be a division of the gypsies, but they don't speak Rom, the Romany language. They're actually more of a kind of an interior nomad in the British Isles, and that they settled in some abandoned housing in London, and I guess the Antifa people fought off police and stuff for them, and he got involved with that. I wouldn't be surprised if that's his actual background. He tried to make it sound like it was, but then he kind of shy away from it, so it's hard to say. But that gives you an idea of where he was coming from, what he was like. and he would get involved in stuff on the on the continent, usually in Germany. There were some big deals that happened around concerts and stuff, and they would fight against the skinhead for right wingers, and at the time there was quite a few of them. I understand they've kind of faded a bit, but that's what he did, and that's I wouldn't be surprised if he actually took part in those. And he got in quite a few riots and scrums, and mostly with the police, but like I say, sometimes with more of a skinhead type. And so that's kind of his story, what he had told to me. And I got to know him fairly well, and so I was pretty familiar with Antifa in the first place. I had a pretty good knowledge of what they were about, and I knew about the Rock Against Racism. I remember they got all over Clapton for a couple things he said, which really isn't exactly fair to Clapton, but it was they weren't exactly the nicest things to say either. I think he talked about some Pakistanis or something. But at any rate, I was aware of them from before, mostly through the rock scene and being a musician, and reading a lot of stuff about what was going on in Europe. I'd been aware of them for quite some time now. And Antifa actually, as that entity, or as that, as we're kind of knowing them now, their origin was, I would say, right around the punk era in the late 70s. And then Mr. Jackass got involved in the late 80s. That's when he joined onto them. But I'd been hearing about them kind of not long after the punk movement really kind of exploded onto the scene in 77, and they were probably out around 79, be my guess, if I remember right around there. And there was that leaning among certain punks anyway. I remember when I was a good anarchist, and that I had problems with the punks. I didn't like the haircut. I wouldn't wear it. I wore my hair really long like Joey Ramone, but I wore leather and all that. And I didn't like the more tone deaf tendencies as such. I mean, I had different musical visions than a lot of them did. I rather like melodic music a little bit better on the whole, but I don't mind atonal stuff depending on what you're doing with it. And I didn't care for the singing out of key. I just really, I couldn't do it for one thing, but I didn't like the sound of it. I've gotten to where I've gotten a little bit more used to it, and sometimes it's kind of entertaining because it's actually kind of funny to me. But when the Sex Pistols first came out, there were times that you had to wonder if they really meant it or if they were joking around. And the swastika thing really put me off. I didn't like that at all. Matter of fact, I was gravely offended with that. And you saw that there was that kind of a dual thing going on, because there was this racist underlying part of that movement that I really detested. So my initial instincts were more with Antifa when they arose, but the violence always turned me off. I didn't care for it. This mob action is a good way to bring the cops in. And I don't think bringing them on is a good idea. See, that's the problem with anarchism, is that it often devolves into just mob action. Now as I progressed in the philosophy and everything regarding anarchism. I got more into the notion of criminality as a political expression. And you'll find that a lot of people did, especially around that time period. And there was a huge part of the punk movement that's really the center of what they were all about. In fact, even with the hippies, you had that going on, and the hippies and everything else. But I never did care much for groups. I think that the mob action was a good way of bringing about repression, and that was a surefire way to call out the fascists, as we put it. And for us, the fascists were the government, and you look at our government, and technically speaking, you could call it fascist. And it has a tendency towards a type of authoritarianism. When confronted, the ability to repress and oppress is with violence is extraordinary. And when you consider the economics, it is more geared towards Mussolini's corporatism than it is towards the Marxist state corporation. And so that does lend a lot of credence to the idea of our government being fascist as such. And I would call it more of a friendly fascism. There's a book called Friendly Fascism that really actually is quite good, although they tend to go after Reagan more than anything, but they also give Carter some of the lumps he has coming too, because Carter actually set the table for Reagan and what he did with his gunboat diplomacy. I didn't disagree with some of that, but I never liked the fact that those two were the ones that deindustrialized the U.S. There was no really good rationale for that. What they did was they really dismantled, the two of them dismantled the middle class, and every president since has contributed to that as well. I think that Obama was probably the worst as far as destroying the middle class goes. But by the time he came in, I mean, it was kind of a foregone conclusion that there would be damage. He just didn't want to rebuild it. Instead, he would prefer to put everybody in crappy service jobs, working in McDonald's. And, the elite know best, right? So, you feed them and you keep their cars going, and that's about it. You get out of their way and know your place. And that's the way he looked at the world. I mean, he saw America as a two-tier system, and he made sure that it was growing towards that. And it's not like the others didn't either. I don't think that Reagan necessarily thought that way, but surely he was being guided by people who did. And one of the things that you have to keep in mind when you really come down to it, for kind of a big picture kind of viewpoint, is to recognize that the neocon movement moved out of the Democrats and into the Republicans. And it actually started with some of the radical ideas that were popular in the 60s among the rebels in the colleges, the SDS and what have you. And although it was more of a Trotskyite bent, kind of perpetual revolution kind of thing. but there's a definite world struggle that using the U.S. as kind of the edge of the point of the sword, all right, to cut apart the other countries and bring them together into really basically what I would call empire. So the neocons came out of actually a very radical and generally socialist viewpoint. And if you examine it, America has been a social democracy for a long time now. I understand that a lot of people put it at the feet of Wilson. I suppose to some extent they're right, although Teddy Roosevelt actually put some things in place too. It's been a slow process since the Gilded Age, and partly because of the Gilded Age, because the robber barons wanted to protect their money, and they were willing to buy the government to get it. And in order to do that, what you had was basically a kind of a proto-fascist arrangement in which these large economic concerns were glommed onto the government and were working with the government and trying to direct the government. And they got their heads together and basically created cartels and coalitions, oligarchies of economic concerns, and they also, for some strange reasons, Ford and what was his name, Carnegie, and many others started creating these NGOs and trusts and stuff, and these were and have been rather vital for this global vision that's been accelerating up until now. I mean, Trump is, I won't say he's stopped it cold, but he's put a couple holes in it, and he's kind of rolling back parts of it, and they're not real happy about it. And that's the thing. When these robber barons and big economic concerns came to the forefront of the Gilded Age, they started working internationally with the British bankers and, well, of course, our bankers, but also the oil companies and just all these other different types of economic concerns, right? They started working primarily with European financial concerns and banking and corporate, corporations and stuff. And these international companies, right? They stretched back to here, and ours went out to there. And Japan kind of came into the deal not too long after that. China got left out. And so when you see the the wars that were fought in China, Boxer Rebellion, the World War II for that matter, the way Japan treated China, that China was actually kind of a second tier power at that time. Oh, hang on a second. Sorry about that. That's a wasp. There we go. There. Sorry about that. That was a wasp. We get them coming into the house from time to time. Sorry. I do realize some of you may have had your sensitivities flustered, but you didn't have to watch me do that. You could just hear it. So at any rate, like I say, China was a second-tier power back then, and so what you had was the emerging powers, right? The ones that came together that actually created what we call trilateralism. Okay. Now, that's the great irony here. These Antifa people are supposed to be anarchists. They don't believe in government as we kind of think of it. Their concepts of how would we say it? Law and rulership are a little bit different. That there's supposed to be a kind of a natural cohesion, social cohesion that comes from people associating freely. Okay. And so what you have is basically anti-statism. And they don't really want an arc, right? A ruler. They want to be without one. Does it mean there's rules? Well, yeah, there's kind of some rules that are agreed upon. But at the same time, it's a free association as opposed to a societal straitjacket like we have today. And they view culture in a different way as well. You know, that there is no real culture. Culture kind of devolves and becomes rather individualistic. Although, you know, things like language, you know, I mean, what happens there? When you come down to it, all forms of anarchism become ultimately unworkable. And as an anarchist, testing different ideas and stuff, I always had to come to that conclusion, was that they were essentially, in a real world sense, unworkable. Although there was a kind of ideal in my mind, after I started moving further and further left, actually, and then there was some place where I just fell off the spectrum. I don't know what happened. I don't know why it happened. Well, yeah, I know why it happened. And I was just changing, and I was testing out different ideas, and ultimately, I came around to more of a capitalistic ideal, and really, I don't know. I call myself libertarian, but I'm really not. I'm not. My ideas have nothing to do with Ayn Rand. They have nothing to do with her. I'd never really read much of her. I don't recall if I read Atlas Shrugged or not. But I think I did. But I don't know. Maybe I didn't. I really don't remember. And but the thing is that libertarianism is a kind of the concept of freedom, right? That I think is a good overarching way of living and letting other people live and let live, really. But I find that the big corporations are as much of a threat as big government is, and so I think I have a slightly different view on it than the party itself. I don't think just the laissez-faire capitalism without any kind of regulation is a good idea. Matter of fact, Adam Smith didn't either, and I'm more pragmatic as an old fart. I recognize the need for government at times, and the government should be lean and mean and effective, but not overly active. It needs to do its job and do it well, and it shouldn't be this bloated bureaucratic mess like it is today. It's just so intrusive into everything that happens. Get it out of our lives. I mean, as much as you can. Let's do our own thing. We're pretty good at that. So, at any rate, I was talking about Antifa, but they should be an anti-globalist kind of movement. In fact, that was the idea with them. I remember in the late 90s and early 2000s that they were explicitly against neoliberalism and neoconservatism. They were against both of those because they were promoting a kind of a international free trade that was unable to be regulated. It was ruining the unions. It was lowering wages everywhere. It was facilitating people and goods crossing borders without much regulation. And that when I thought that actually NAFTA originally wasn't a bad idea because they were saying that it would be sufficient to promote the people of Mexico to make a decent living in their home country and not have the need to move abroad. They lied. And it turned out to be just another fiasco as far as it went. It enriched the already rich of Mexico. It forced a lot of the poor campesinos to take jobs across the border, even more so. It was a huge exodus that came about because of NAFTA, and it's still ongoing. Although it's coming to be shut down to a trickle, thank God. There's no reason to displace people. See, that's what these the suckers of globalism, I should say, because they might not think that they're promoting it, but the suckers of globalism, the useful idiots of globalism, the rank and file of the Democratic Party, basically now. What they don't get is not only is it a form of slavery, it's unnecessary. If the people of Mexico are allowed to thrive in their own borders, I think they would rather stay there. They speak the language, they understand the culture, they live there, their families are there. Why would they want to move? It's just the same thing with the Syrians. If they stop the war in Syria, what motivation would those people have to come to the United States? Or for that matter, Europe? The assumptions that they would want to go there are terrifically Eurocentric or Numerocentric. And really, quite frankly, I find them obnoxious. Even to some extent, in as much as you're talking about people of different ethnicities, racist. I thought the same thing. In fact, the assumption, if you think about it, that those people in Syria or Libya or whatever can't deal with democracy. They're incapable of understanding it. That too is a racist assumption. Tremendously racist and ethnocentric and highly bigoted. And I just don't see where they have any kind of moral high ground. I don't. They don't. And I won't grant it to them. because we still hear those same assumptions that there's these people from other countries, particularly from other continents besides Europe, are somehow inferior. The assumption that black people in the United States can't find the DMV and get an ID is bigoted and racist. Mr. Schumer, it is you who is the racist. And when you say that other people who are not citizens should be allowed to vote in the United States elections, you're a liar. There is nothing in any document anywhere in the history of the United States, or any other country for that matter, that says that non-citizens have the right to vote. Nothing. And you've done that. You've made that claim. And you are a lying piece of crap. Yeah. And you guys own Antifa now. After all the nonsense that went on about it and all the defenses you made for it. No, of course, you got the Washington Post saying that they're violent. Yeah, we know that. We've been saying that. You're the ones that didn't get it. And Pelosi finally says they're violent. Well, really, what was your first clue, ma'am? You guys own them. The violence that's been done in the United States is really mostly at the fault of the Democratic Party, because they've been promoting these people, and they've been accepting the fact that Soros put some money behind them, and they've been going along with it. And they try to convince all of us that, oh no, you don't see what you see. And now they finally have to come out and say, well, they are violent. That poor girl in Charlottesville didn't have to die. That's Terry McAuliffe's fault. Mayor of Berkeley, Mayor of San Francisco, turn their backs and let these idiots go wild on people. Now the mayor of Berkeley is finally disavowing him, and he's supposedly one of them. I guess he's not anymore. How dare you? How dare you people? And then try to run away from it. No. You're going to wear that one. I don't think people are going to forget this one. Violence is very impressive to people. We've been impressed. Right wing, or whatever you want to call them, Klan, all those people, we don't like them. I don't like them. I never did like them. I used to argue with them, fight with them. They hated me and I hated them. And I gave Antifa chances. But, when it came to it, in 1999, they were at the Seattle World Trade Organization meeting. And they embarrassed me. I mean, I had self-identified as an anarchist for many years. And I would again later, but after there had been enough distance between it, and actually the whole thing kind of died down here in the States. But for a few years there, they were just nuts. It was like 2005, and they just kind of disappeared. Kind of like the anti-war movement. it came out of the woodwork for Bush, and then it's like, you guys are irrelevant. You're totally irrelevant. You said that you don't do anything against Clinton because he's one of us, whatever that meant. And then you pull out the barricades when Bush came in. Screw you. Nobody took you seriously. Nobody. But of course, you stayed hidden through Obama. I mean, your fake messiah had to be good for him. And he was a bigger warmonger than Bush was. Bush 2 and Bush 1. He was a bigger one than Reagan. Good grief. He was worse than Reagan, Bush 1, Bush 2, Clinton, and all rolled together. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. And you people just said, "Oh, he's fantastic." Just like Trump, It's like he's an empty suit. Obama's an empty suit. Everybody would throw all their hopes and fears into. And I'm seeing that the Democrats are doing the same thing to Trump. But keep in mind, people, Trump is a message, not the messenger. And the message isn't over yet. And I think he's doing a reasonably good job of being a message. It's kind of fun to listen to the wailing, especially since it has no purpose or no bearing on reality at all. So at any rate, I've rambled and gotten further afield than I planned. But like I say, Antifa, I had personal experiences with it. I watched it rise a couple times. Here in the United States, it just didn't take hold, and it's probably going to fade again pretty quickly. Watch where it splinters off to. Keep an eye on that. I'll probably have more on these idiots coming up soon. Maybe the next one. I might do something else in between. But I did want to talk about my ex-roommate and the experience I had with him, and what kind of a person he was. I have the feeling that he, Mr. Jackass, is in keeping with the Antifa character in general, and I think that his trait's pretty much, and if not, I maybe I'm being unfair to them, but I don't think so. But what I've heard from him kind of makes me think of him. They're not the brightest. And a lot of them are college educated. He was. I mean, that doesn't make him smart. And it surely doesn't give him common sense. Until next time.